The internet can now see us. I'm going to edit this video and put in some great music and intros and stuff. But for right now, I just want to start off by saying, hey, people, how you doing? Audio looks good. Hello, my name is Tim Black. Welcome to the Tim Black Show. This is a special presentation of the Tim Black Show because I have a special guest. Marianne Williamson is an author and an activist, and she's currently running for the presidency, as you all know. She's a moral leader. She aims to be a moral leader at a time we need it most. Her key cornerstones of her campaign are reparations and the Department of Peace and the Department of Children and Youth are core issues of her campaign, folks. Once again, Marianne Williamson. How you doing, Marianne?
I'm great, thank you.
Man, thank you so much for taking time out. I understand you got a packed schedule. You were in South Carolina, then in Chicago, and now you're where?
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Wow, wow, wow. So in your travels, Marianne, just to get right to it, when you talk to people, what are some of the concerns for those folks in South Carolina, Chicago, and LA?
The deepest concern that I sense everywhere is a concern for the state of our country. You know, politicians fail often to realize how noble and intelligent people are. People are not just interested in what relates to them personally. People know that we're all threatened by the general erosion of democracy today. People know that we're all threatened by the lack of economic justice. People know we're all threatened by the fact that 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. People recognize that we're all threatened by the fact that we have basically shifted from a functioning democracy to a functioning corporatocracy, that the corporations today are like a new aristocracy, and that's what our forefathers repudiated in 1776, and we need to repudiate it again. So I think people realize how much of the societal dysfunction that eats away not only at our systems, but also at our own personal lives, whether it has to do with lack of access to healthy food, whether it has to do with lack of health care, whether it has to do with lack of education, whether it has to do with college loans, whether it has to do with lack of economic opportunity, whether it has to do with racial injustice, whether it has to do with private prisons, whether it has to do with constant war machine. Those are all connected underneath the soil. They're all connected by this horrifying, immoral way that huge corporate interest money dominates and has corrupted our government. That's what I find. I don't think that at the deepest level, people are that different in South Carolina than in New Hampshire, than in Nevada, than in California, than in Chicago.
Well, I just appreciate it. It's so refreshing to hear someone just put it out there like that. And I've been a fan of your candidacy from its inception because you seem to be so in touch with the issues that matter to people. Because for some time we were really distracted by these, like the Russia. We were talking about Russia. Now we're talking about Donald Trump impeachment. Are people talking to you about Donald Trump's possible impeachment?
Well, on one hand, I feel the emotional tenor of this moment is exhaustion. I think people are like so tired of all this. People are so tired of the chaos and the craziness. On the other hand, people do understand it's a really big deal that we have a lawless president. So I think people understand, guys, we're going to have to talk about a lot of things right now. We're just going to have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We're just going to have to, because the age in which we live demands it.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does. Absolutely. Talking about those cornerstones of your campaign, reparations is one that I'll just be frank. A lot of black folks are like, "Wow, we got a sister up here talking about this," and they're willing to put it on the front burners as opposed to not even in the kitchen at all. In our political conversation, what leads you to even bring this up? I mean, it can't make you that popular at dinner parties.
No. Well, it doesn't make me unpopular though either, which is something that I want more Black people to know. How many white people are going, yeah, because people are decent and dignified. I think most Americans, however, are just very undereducated about the history of race in the United States. And when people do hear those things which either they didn't know or they haven't learned since the 7th grade, there's much more openness to what this means than you might think. But when you ask me what took me there, I wrote a book in 1997 called Healing the Soul of America, talking about the intersection of spirituality and politics. So my whole career for the last 35 years has been about the application of spiritual principle to practical situations. Now, one of those spiritual principles is that you cannot have the future you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. So it's not about a black agenda for me. It's about America, an American agenda, because I want to help end one aberrational chapter of American history and begin a new one. But when it comes to our original character defect, we still have things to clean up. Some things have been cleaned up, but then in other ways we've actually slid backwards. So what I find is when you say to people, first slave ships came here in 1619, slavery not abolished for another 250 years. That at the end of slavery, 1865, there were between 4 and 5 million formerly enslaved people. That they were promised 40 acres and a mule for a family of 4. That promise was rescinded. That except for the time of Reconstruction, the entire 100 years following the end of the Civil War was another era of institutionalized violence against Black people. A lot of people just haven't really put that in their minds. I say to people, what do you call lynchings if not domestic terrorism? What do you call Ku Klux Klan if not domestic terrorism? So what you end up with is 350 years of institutionalized violence. So when people are thinking, people are processing, and then you get, and the economic gap, obviously economic gap at the end of the Civil War, not only has never not been closed, but a lot of white people also don't realize how many efforts, Black Wall Street, et cetera, how many efforts at the accumulation of Black wealth had been thwarted by local governmental policies, et cetera, how in some ways we're moving backwards because of mass incarceration, racial sentencing disparity, et cetera. And also, when people hear the historical context, that Germany paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations, that Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act in 1988 that gave the surviving prisoners from the World War II internment camps, Japanese internment camps, were paid between $20,000 and $22,000. And then the clincher for me, it's a stimulus. A study was done recently that if Black families created as much wealth as white families, our economy would be $1.5 million larger. There's nothing to be afraid of here. If we have a $500 billion reparations plan in which over a period of 20 years, money is dispersed to a reparations council of, obviously they're to be descendants of slaves in America. People such as Professor Sandy Darity at Duke University, people who've done, scholarly work on this for years, cultural leaders, political leaders, academic leaders. And the stipulation on the part of the American government would be this, that the money is to go towards purposes of economic and educational renewal. Now, that's a big deal to me. And that's what makes this different than race-based policies. Race-based policies are good, obviously, if some candidate says we're going to give money to home ownership or we're going to give money to historically Black colleges, all that's good. But it's still, to me, a continuation of the same paternalism. We messed with you, we're going to tell you how we're going to fix you. What I like about reparations is, if I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it. Reparations carries a moral authority because it carries the emotional, psychological, and spiritual power of an acknowledgement of a wrong that was done, a debt that is owed. We're talking about a debt here, a debt that is owed, and the willingness on the part of people to pay it. So it really disrupts a pattern and really helps with racial reconciliation in a way that race-based policies alone do not. And that's how I see it. So like I said, this is for all of America. This is not just, I think when Germany paid reparation to the Jews, it wasn't just so that the Jews could start over, it's so that Germany could start over.
Very interesting way to put it. I agree 100%. I had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Sandy Darity just the other day, Thursday it was, and actually just put out the second part of a 3-part series with him. And I was totally amazed. And one of the things I love about it, Ms. Williamson, is that it gives me an opportunity to wake people up. It's not just about the reparations, but the educational portion of it, where people start seeing, oh, wow, So just because Tim Black has on a cool blazer right now, Tim Black, his story, the generational situation with black folks is different than white folks. So white folks aren't educated to the true condition, and to a large measure, Marianne, most black folks aren't either. They don't know that without the due to racism, systemic racism, our families weren't able to amass wealth. And that's not something you see when you look at me. You don't see that, 3 generations ago, what my, ancestors were unable to do, and how that affects me and my children going forward. That we aren't able to start businesses because we don't have the resources. And it's not every white person. It's not like every white person has all this money in the bank, but it's the median. Right, so it's the median that the average black family has about a tenth of the wealth of the average white family. Educating white folks and black folks to the reality that we just don't have the same foothold in America, and it's not for reasons of like they like to say to us, Marianne, and it's sometimes repeated by black folks too. So when I talk, Marianne, it's never just about white folks. It's also like one of the running things in the black community is we need to do better. We need to just stop buying shoes, tennis shoes. We need to stop getting our hair done, as if that has anything to do with building wealth, generational wealth. And that's why I had a privilege to talk to Dr. Dirty. And from my understanding, you were the only presidential candidate that went to the American Descendants of Slavery conference in Kentucky. How was that?
Good. It was very nice. Antonio Moore, who I was on his radio show early in my campaign. I think, yeah, they were lovely. They were lovely. And also going back to what you said, I've noticed when I talk about the Black Code laws, most white people don't even know that at the end of the Civil War, that once the federal troops left, the white legislatures throughout the South passed laws that ensured subpar economic, social, and political opportunity for people. And when people realize and are educated to the fact that, wow, that stuff did not end until 1964. I mean, that was my lifetime. So I think that we need a politics in this and in a lot of areas that gives the people a chance to be noble and intelligent. But part of political leadership should be educating people about what's really going on and our disconnection from our history. We all know that one of the ways to disempower people is to disconnect them from their history. But we as Americans are too disconnected from our history. We have 11 states in this country that don't even demand half a year of requirement of American history and government and civics, and that's part of how we got into this trouble. Too many Americans don't know the history of our country anymore. Well, and how can you be responsible for the future when you don't hardly know anything about the past?
I tend to think we learn too much from our movies.
Although on the topic of race and slavery, actually. I would actually argue that this is one area where Hollywood has, in a really beautiful way, taken up the slack of a lot of the lack of education. Wouldn't you? I mean, if you think of like 12 Years a Slave and even Roots and Out of Compton, and I mean, I think actually Hollywood is actually to be somewhat commended for some of the ways that I think people have learned history about race that too much our educational system has not given people and that our political leadership has ignored. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not wrong at all. I was thinking in the terms of like the World War II, where, I never knew how many Russians died in World War II trying to fight Nazism. Like, I didn't know, we lost a lot of people, and that's very unfortunate, but there were like 1 million Russians, members of the Soviet Union who died. And I never hear about that. I just hear about how we came and saved the day. But when it comes to, you're absolutely right, Roots, I mean, I think that was my generation's, I'm a Gen Xer, and that was my generation's like foray into what we weren't being taught, and that kind of sparked us to want to find out more.
Yeah. But I think if you did either in high school or college, learn about World War II, or if you've watched any of the documentaries on History Channel, etc., you see that the Russians, I mean, I mean, that's just about whether or not some. I mean, I think sometimes people in America are too intellectually lazy to read a book these days, and then we say, "Well, they never tell us." Well, you never read it, you know what I mean? And
That's
it's just
true.
so much.
But and maybe you can help me with
Not that
this.
hard to know that the Russians were going to war with
Yeah, you're right. You got to have, curiosity and want to look stuff up, and we got a computer right here, right?
them. Yeah, exactly.
But I will say that when I look at one thing, I'm gonna ask you a question, but it's for me personally as well. I'm trying to bridge my audience. I'm trying to educate them, and you as a white person, I don't want to turn people off, but I want to educate them. And I think that's worth the risk of turning people off if I can help some people like kind of see what's going on that's beyond themselves. What are some tactics or ways you would suggest that I do that in a way that I'm able to maintain an audience that is diverse and still get that information out?
Well, it's interesting because I'm going through the same thing myself, as a candidate. The former Senator Carol Mosley Braun from Illinois? Yeah,
Yes, I
I
think
think
so.
she was the first Black woman senator. Um, I had the honor of meeting her the other night, and she said something to me that I thought was just amazing that you might find relevant to this. If you're 3 steps ahead, they hate you. If you're 2 steps ahead, they admire you. If you're 1 step ahead, they follow you.
Mm,
Isn't that amazing?
it is.
So I've been thinking about that a lot in the last few days since I heard her say that. Because it's true, if you go too far too fast, it makes people constrict or glaze over or disconnect.
Right.
So we have to have, I mean, all of us at some level are like a child who wants somebody to read us a bedtime story. Just explain it to me. And I think when it comes to race, tell me in a way, like you look at someone like Oprah, it's amazing what the country was willing and able to hear from her. There's just something about the way she delivers information. It's so neutral.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people like you and me, sometimes our passion is good. But I know for myself, my passion can be tinged with at least the appearance of judgment in a way that does not serve. So I don't know if that
Yeah.
applies to you, but that's the lesson that I have to find my completely neutral place. Like even when I talk about race and I say, it's not a technique, I mean it. I say it because I mean it. It's not like I find the average American racist. I just think the average American is undereducated about race. I just see white audiences relax because they don't think I'm coming. They're not feeling like I'm coming at them with your bad,
Mm.
and then they can hear. So it's all those principles of nonviolent communication.
Well, I definitely can learn a bit about that as part of my thing is ranting and getting passionate about stuff. And
Yeah,
that's
well,
sort of
what I
like,
found in my own life and my own work was that left me only talking to people who already agreed with me.
mm, I hear you, Johnson. I do. Now, you also have other things about your campaign. It's not just about reparations, folks. The U.S. Department of Children and Youth. Now, some people say we got too much government. I tend to believe we just need better government. What would this new agency do if you were able to create it?
We have millions of chronically traumatized children. We have 13 million hungry children. We have millions of American children who go to school hungry. We have some kids who are traumatized before preschool. We have elementary school children on suicide watch. We have some children who live in what's called America's domestic war zones, where the violence at home, the violence in their communities, the violence at school is so great that they're experiencing a form of PTSD that psychologists say is no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq. There was recently a report that up to 40% of the girls in the Chicago public schools are thought to have PTSD. We need trauma-informed education. We need community wraparound services. We need emotional and psychological learning techniques. We need better nutrition in the schools. We need mindfulness in the schools. There are so many points of stress. For instance, I'll give you a statistic here. We have millions of American kids who go to classrooms where there aren't even the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child can't learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. Where do you think these kids are going to be in 20 years? So this is about more than your Department of Education. I'll give you an example. The other night at the LGBTQ forum, um, a child who's a transgender child, was asking um, Elizabeth Warren about, what will you do to make it so that a transgender child um, wouldn't have to worry about anything but their homework. And Elizabeth said something about wanting the Secretary of Education to know that it's a vulnerability. The problem is so much bigger than that. The problem is so much bigger than just having the Secretary of Education alert to this. That's why if you look at the Secretary, education certainly is everything. We need more funding, we need more teachers, we need smaller classrooms, we need mental health counselors, all of that. But I can't tell you how many times I meet teachers who say, I didn't train to become a behavioral therapist.
Mm.
They're not only are they sending too many kids into my classroom, but they're sending kids with unbelievable behavioral problems, et cetera, and they just dump them in my lap. So the problem is so big, we need a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. They should be rescued no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster. And all that the political establishment has done is to normalize their despair. So we have agencies for families and children in our Health and Human Services division. But the problem is so huge at this point, is so massive, that I want an entire department that helps coordinate all these efforts. Just like with the Department of Homeland and Security, what we did was we coordinated a lot of other pieces, and that's what I want to do with the Department of Children and Youth.
I love it. It's a refreshing new idea. I think it's something we need to focus on. And one of the things that has bugged me, now don't get me wrong, Marianne, of course I don't want children and parents split up at the border. Never. I support families 100%, and that's something that I think is appalling, right? But we split up families all the time. And we do it under the guise of our legal system. If you have too many tickets, we take you, lock you up. If you miss bail, if you can't make bail, we take and lock you up. And you're not with your kids at that time. So we have an over incarceration problem in this country that also leads to your point about how the children are neglected. Our system, it's the way our system's set up. Wouldn't you think? Wouldn't you agree?
Your point is so well taken, and it's an important point, because I have found it and I agree with you, I'm not in any way minimizing the plight of these children at the border, but the children I've been talking about for the last 5 minutes, they've been here all along. And nobody's talking about rescuing them. Nobody's talking about the violence against them, which is endemic to this kind of educational policy. You were really talking about something important. It's an talk, the difference between what's called a screaming emergency and a silent emergency.
Mm.
And a lot of people who like to think they're so hip to racial issues don't realize they're unconscious neglect of these children. You're actually pointing to something very important. And a lot of these children that you just mentioned, the plight, they become traumatized when mommy or daddy is taken away. And we don't have any provision for health services, social workers to come check on these kids to see how they're doing. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. And also, another element that we really need to address and change is that we base our educational system primarily on the funding on property taxes.
Mm.
And we need to change that. Because if you're the richest country in the world and you're withholding education from a child just because they live in a poorer neighborhood, that's a passive form of oppression right there.
Right, absolutely, and that hurts people in rural areas of Stone Mountain, West Virginia, all the way to I don't know, different areas of Chicago or different areas of Washington D.C. that aren't gentrified yet. Yeah,
absolutely right, and you're right to point out that that poverty almost is a weapon of oppression.
Mm.
is the same whether you're talking about a rural white neighborhood or an urban Black neighborhood.
Absolutely. Wow. I got a couple questions. I guess I could ask. Here goes the most. I guess the most glaring one. The debates are tomorrow. I noticed that you won't be on the stage. Does that seem fair to you? Does that make sense? You've been through this process now, and the way that they decide the polls that they look at. What's your take on all of that? We know Tulsi Gabbard's been talking about it. How do you feel about it? It directly affects you.
I feel that the efforts of the DNC and the media should be to facilitate democracy, not to dictate democracy. So these polls are a very opaque situation where they're talking to people who are already in their crowd, likely Democratic voters, etc. So yeah, it makes it very difficult for a non-establishment candidate to get in there. But I think given how putrid the establishment mentality is today, somebody outside the box is necessary because the box is saturated with toxicity. So I hope that I'll be in the fifth debate, but for that, I need people to donate money. I need people to volunteer. I need people to go to marianne2020.com and do what they can, because I'd like to get back in there. I'm definitely out there. I'm definitely in this race.
Mm-hmm.
But people have to recognize that they're interested in hearing a candidate laying it down the way I am. Then you have to work for it.
Yeah.
You can't just say, oh, I want her voice out there. Have you? Because if you sent $1, if you sent $5,
Mm-hmm.
have you signed up to volunteer? It's a very interesting thing, because the power of the political establishment and the media to create this image that she's not qualified, which is basically just saying she's not one of us.
Right.
She doesn't know how to drive this car. Well, first of all, I have real questions about this car. And secondly, we're on the wrong road. It's not just about the car, it's about the road we're on.
Yeah, one of the things I experience is when I talk negatively about Donald Trump, I try to make it about policy. And as you've been laying out the last 20 minutes or so, all these issues that we have where you could say, hey, Trump, why aren't you putting more money into our education system instead of, bombs? Or, hey, Trump, why did you cut this program that that drastically impacts disenfranchised people, the most vulnerable people in our society? Instead, people want me to get on him about superficial things. Now that you're in the political arena, I know that you're not new to media. What are some of the things about politics and the way that we interact with this that really disturb you?
Well, it's all everything you and I have been talking about tonight. It's all our government does more to advocate for short-term profits for huge multinational corporate entities than to advocate for us. So whether it's health insurance companies or big pharmaceutical companies or gun manufacturers or chemical companies or food companies or oil and gas or defense contractors, our government functions in such a way as to do more for their short-term profits than to do for us or for the planet. And that is because of the undue influence of money. So that's what we have to change, because all of this craziness started in the 1980s, but bad public policy produced it, and we need good public policy to replace that. And that's why the first thing we need is we need public funding to establish, we need legislation to establish public funding of federal campaigns. And ultimately, we need a constitutional amendment. Money should have nothing to do with this.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders just came out with some new legislation to fight corruption in our government, and I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at it, but very interesting.
I'm not sure which thing you're talking about. What is that?
He's put out a new bill that he just launched. It was like right after the hospital stay, because people want to characterize it different ways. I think it was the Friday after he got out, they dropped a bomb. They dropped a piece of legislation to end corporate, to say that we're not going to put money in our politics, right? So they were going to change.
I want to look and see exactly what his bill says.
Yeah, like far as taking money from private corporations, big corporations, big money, and aimed it directly at the DNC. Like, hey, even inauguration won't be funded by big corporations, just to limit the money in our political system. And based on what you said, it sounds like
cancer underlying all the other cancers.
Yeah.
So we have had this massive transfer of wealth into the hands of 1% of our population. We didn't have this wealth inequality in the 1970s. We now have the largest wealth inequality since 1929. And we have, like I said, 1% of all Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. You have 93 million Americans living in near poverty, 43 million living in poverty. And money doesn't come from a bunch of corporate aristocrats who are dropping crumbs from their table in the form of job creation. We need to awaken and change the paradigm to know that money comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. So you can look at any kindergarten in any neighborhood in America. If you want to see where money comes from helping to actualize the brain of every child. And that's why every school should be a palace of learning and culture and the arts. If you want an amazingly prosperous economy 10 years from now, take better care of your 10-year-olds today. So it can't just be treating the symptom. We've also got to work this stuff on the level of cause, starting with the children.
Got it. I have a 10-year-old son, and I know exactly what you mean, what we try to do.
Absolutely. You should have, if America wants to be prosperous, because just think about the money. If your son is given everything possible to make him learn, help him be expansive, help him be in touch with his own power, America will be better off, because then he as an adult will be able to create, will be able to produce, he'll be a better employer, he'll be a better employee, he'll have ideas. That's why your son, you shouldn't even have to think about whether or not he can go to college. That's why he shouldn't be straddled with college loans. America will be better off if your son can be the man that you want him to be. You and he should feel that public policy is helping you do that, not thwarting your efforts to do that. Unleashing our spirits, uncapping our dreams, that's where money comes from. That's where peace comes from. So we have to completely shift the paradigm of where money comes from. So that's why we need a president who understands the holistic view of all this, that we've got to work with the level of cause. And most of that, your son in 10 years from now is going to be a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
We want to set him up. And all society should be setting him up so that by 25, he is so rocking it. And so think about the unrealized millions, billions, and even trillions of dollars that this country will not manifest if we do not see your son's brain. We now know about the brain of children that we didn't even know 50 years ago, particularly before the age of 8. So there is nothing in the wind and nothing in the sun and nothing in the ground that can even begin to fuel the 21st century we want, like the brain of your little boy. That is where our genes, that's where it all lies.
Wow. Yeah, that's inspirational. Maybe you should write a couple books, Miss Williamson. You're really good at this stuff.
Well, I have written those books.
I know.
But, you can write books and it's good ideas. Mm-hmm. You become president and you have the levers of power at your command.
But isn't Donald Trump already doing all that? I hear people all the time saying, Tim, Donald Trump's doing so great economically. Look at the Dow Jones. Look at the growth we've had, the GPA or the GOP or whatever. So I thought he was doing a great job.
Okay, well, the question there is good for whom? Good for whom?
There you go.
Very good for that 1%. Yeah, but that 2017 $2 trillion tax cut gave 83 cents of every dollar to the richest earners and the richest corporations. We should repeal that and put back in the middle class tax cut. So, of course, given that tax cut, sure, then it looks like the economy is good. For whom? Meanwhile, millions of Americans have to work 2 and 3 jobs. So they talk about the unemployment low. Yeah. And they're counting the fact that there are people who have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to put food on their table. That means they get home at night. They don't even have the energy to talk to their partner or their spouse. They don't even have the energy to read the bedtime story to their little kid. They don't have, there's so much societal dysfunction and pathology that arises because people are so stressed and anxious all the time. And also those unemployment figures don't show all the people who've just dropped out because they just, you have 100,000 homeless children in America. So when they say the economy is so good for who?
Yeah, they no longer count those folks after a certain period of time as even being unemployed. They just don't exist anymore on paper. One of my last questions, because I know you're a very busy lady. Beto O'Rourke brought up something. You brought up the LGBTQ forum. He talked about churches losing their non-exempt status if they would marry gay couples. Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, I hadn't heard about that.
Okay. Okay.
I'd have to.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
What are your plans for your campaign? I know you're in LA. What are we doing? What's the plan for Marianne Williamson 2020?
My plan is for people to just continue to lift this thing up. We have a lot of, they really came after me after the second debate.
Mm-hmm.
They came after me. They knew that I was getting popular, so they came at me with all this craziness about anti-science, anti-medicine, dangerous woman, crazy woman, and they had an effect. So now I know people who get that for what it is, the hit, the smear, to get in there, send money, say you'll volunteer. If you want this conversation if you want this conversation to be the campaign that takes it all the way, then all of us have to be involved. Get me, tag me on social media and talk to your friends and look at my issues section, read it on Marianne2020.com. Look what it says. Do your thinking. Don't let other people do your thinking for you. And there are a lot of good candidates, and I'm not saying they're all good people. I mean, we just got to make sure it's a Democrat, but everybody's telling the truth. But at a time like this, we need to do more than tell the truth. We need to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. We need to lay it down with a much deeper level of radical truth telling. It's too late for all this pussyfooting around what's really going on in this country. And not only that, but I don't think anything less than radical truth telling is going to beat Donald Trump. He tells outrageous lies. And the only thing that is going to defeat that is outrageous truth. We need to tell the real truth. We need to get real. The whole political establishment is kind of like not what we're all really talking about. We need to, I always say about my campaign, I'm not saying anything everybody I know isn't saying. I'm just saying it when the mic is on. We need to have a presidential candidate and a president who is saying it the way we all know it really is. Because that's the only way this country will be able to put everything on the table that's really going on, deal with it like adults, and move to the other side.
Man, I love that wrap up, but I'll tell you, the only thing I don't agree with is that we just need a Democrat. I think we need a certain type of a certain type of person in that office. And just because you got a D or an R in front of the name, that's not enough for me. So, but I agree with the sentiment of a real person, a real fighter for the people. That's what we need. Yeah, totally agree.
And more than a fighter, I don't want to go to Washington and fight with people. I'm going to go to Washington and co-create with people. Because what needs to be done in Washington also has to be done in every city and every state. All of us have to wake up now, and not just wake up to elect a new president, but we need to stay awake and really change this country.
Wow. Well, thank you, Marianne Williamson, for giving us some of your time. We appreciate you. Folks, go to Marianne2020.com. Is that correct?
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go to Marianne2020.com, guys.
Marianne2020.com. I think you can also get there, Marianne Williamson for president.
Okay.
I think if you're looking for my website, I think you'll find it.
Well, you know what? Don't worry, Marianne. When I post this video, I'll make sure links to all your stuff is included. I appreciate you. All right.
God bless you, honey. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Oh, and Columbus Day. I'm sorry.
Columbus Day. Well, I wrote a book in 1997 called Healing the Soul of America, and I said it then. I think it should be called Immigrants Day.
I hear that. We forgot to mention it because we don't acknowledge it, because to us it's not something to celebrate, right?
Yeah. Well, he wasn't who when we were little kids, and Ferdinand and Isabella, these were bad people. They were what we were taught they were, and so he was not. It's just believed it's mistakes in history. We constantly need to look back, slavery, and we have to look back at Native Americans. We have to look back at Columbus, and you simply change it. So I say, let's make it Immigrants Day.
Make it Immigrants Day. Thank you once again, Marianne.
Thank you.
Good luck. You got it.
Take care.
All right, folks, that's it. I'll see you tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Tim Black Show at night. And talk to you soon. And